maybe the most instinctive way of communicating with other people. There have always been stories and fairy tales. And when your best friend comes along and says, oh, I have such a story to tell you, you won't believe this. You know, you get a little thrill, you really want to hear this story. So there'll be some sort of narrative or an anecdote. It seems to be like a really basic way of communicating. But then the literary short story builds upon that. It has the qualities of telling a story so that there's some sort of a narrative, but there's something going on with the language and kind of withholding the denouement till the end.
I'm very curious about the title, Zero Sum, and there's a passage here that you might read to talk a little bit about why you chose that title. I'm going to hand you your book.
Well, I should say that I wrote the stories in this book during the pandemic, and I live all alone 4 miles outside Princeton, sort of a kind of semi-rural suburban area. So our quarantine in New Jersey began like on March 13th, 2020. So the day before, a couple of days before, I was teaching at the university at Princeton and had a kind of normal life, you know, seeing friends. And then suddenly we were just told to go home. And in the early days of the pandemic, as you might remember, nobody really knew what was going on. There wasn't any clear agenda for anything. It was sort of like local options. Some schools closed and some remained open. So my students and I at Princeton, we were shocked. You know, we told, well, they're all going home. They were told to go back to their residences and pack their things and get out, you know, and it was really shocking. But we had the erroneous idea that we would all be back in April. There was like a rumor. So, well, we'll be back, you know, so you can leave some of your things here. And I actually didn't come back for a couple of years, you know. So it's kind of a prefatory to the mood that we were all in of anticipation and apprehension and really not knowing what was coming next. So I wrote most of the stories that are in this book, particularly one is called This Is Not a Drill, that more or less takes place in my own house. And other stories, one's called The Cold, which is a kind of surreal exploration of being really isolated and maybe feeling that you're losing your mind. We have personalities that are in context relationship to other people, and when you don't have other people like as mirrors, you don't really have that definition of a personality. Though I do live with 2 cats. So the cats have I guess they have a certain expectation. So I thought I would put together a collection about stories that deal with the individual in some sort of contest or competition with other people. So zero sum is a concept that probably most of you know, and yet I don't think we understand that we're engaged in zero sum contests very often in our lives without being aware of them. So I'll read you a little section from this title story, Zero Sum. Game theory is a paradigm of life, unless life is a paradigm of game theory. In game theory, a zero-sum game is one in which there is a winner and there is a loser, and the spoils go to the winner and nothing to the loser. And the sum of the benefit wealth gained by the transaction is zero, because nothing is gained. Laws of economics, Darwinian natural selection. The weak fall by the wayside, the strong roll their carts over the bones of the dead. Take no prisoners, no negotiations. A Hobbesian universe, tyranny of might makes right. Vulgar American soul, winner take all. Of course, there is the possibility of the non-zero-sum game. In theory, all knowledge posits a non-zero-sum situation. For one person to acquire knowledge does not subtract from another's acquisition of knowledge. For one person to acquire an appreciation of culture does not subtract from another's appreciation of culture. The character in my story is called K period, that's abbreviation. She has never been sure what love is, though she has been hearing the word, the soothing, seducing syllable, for as long as she can remember. In its purest form, love is the quintessence of this non-zero-sum game, for two can love equally, it's claimed, and the love is then doubled, not halved. Neither player wins and neither player is doomed to lose, and nothing is lost in theory. In reality, however, love has seemed to Kay the very quintessence of the zero-sum game. She has no idea how to play the game, so she stays clear. She has no trust. She doesn't want to be hurt. She can't even imagine another person laying hands on her body. It's humiliating, though, her wounded heart, her disappointment in Professor M. This is a young graduate student in philosophy. It's not set at any particular university, though it could be Princeton or Rutgers or Harvard, where there are strong philosophy departments. And no doubt at University of Chicago, there's a very strong philosophy department here. So it's set at a place where there's really brilliant professors and very famous professors and excellent students who are coming from all over the world to study. But then when they get there in the seminar, they're all in competition. So it's a kind of shocking thing, and it's very common experience that people feel in graduate school. So she feels that she has fallen in love with this professor, who is a very well-known professor, and he has failed to acknowledge her as she should be acknowledged. It's a PhD program ranked highest ranked in the United States, notorious for its savage competition, in which weaker students are in constant danger of being winnowed out. There's something terrifying about the term winnowed out, like little winnows, and you don't really want to think about that you might be a winnow. So I won't read too much more, but the professor presents this proposition to the class. He says, to curtail competition and the negativity that accompanies competition, which mitigates against the joy of exploring philosophy, that's the primary reason for it, I propose everyone agree to receive the identical grade. And there's stunned silence in the room and nervous smiles, and they glance around and look at each other. Each individual's thinking is gripped by thinking. Was the proposal a variant of the prisoner's dilemma? Was it a trick? Was it a joke? Until at last, after excruciating silence, one person raised his hand to inquire which grade this would be. A minus. A minus, uneasy laughter and weak smiles. Professor M benevolently oblivious as the Buddha, gazing upon all of them equally. Each thinking, but I am not A minus, I am A. And among them is Kay. She's sitting with her arms tightly folded, holding herself very still. And she thinks, not me, I'm not one of you. And seeing the expression in their faces, Professor M assured them that they could vote on the proposal anonymously with a secret ballot. No one should feel pressured to vote one way or the other, or even to vote at all. Our subject for the seminar is the philosophy of mind, but of course that's philosophies and minds in the plural. That's our true subject. I will pass out ballots. So he passes out ballots. And Kay's hand trembled as she black printed no on her ballot. And then he gathers all the ballots back. And there are 15 students. Well, it's unanimous. No. And around the table is nervous laughter, relief and excitement, but also dread. So you have rejected non-zero sum. You have rejected the safety of a guaranteed grade in hope of earning a higher grade for yourself. Though it's probably the case some of you will regret this decision, still, it's a worthy decision. Rejecting the safe harbor of socialism, casting your lot with taking your chance, that is all you can do. Then he adds, and I could say this is true from my experience as a professor also, my seminars are not zero-sum. I do not confer victory on one person and defeat on all the others. That's not a principle of mine. I have no objection to giving all A's if the grade's deserved. And that's true in my teaching also. I try to take away the whole concept of the zero-sum game by saying that doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. But the interesting thing about this is when the students asked the professor how people voted in the past, he said, nobody has ever voted against it. It's always unanimous. They always want to be surprised.
Thank you, Joyce. So throughout these stories, there's kind of different variations on this idea of zero sum, and I want to move to the next story. I don't want to do any spoilers here, but Mr. Stickum is one of the scariest stories I've ever read in my life. And there's a line in there. It's a group of girls appalled by the behavior of men in their community, and there's a line, "For always it is expected of girls, as of adult women, that we will be loving, forgiving, merciful. But Mr. Stickum has taught us that it is a losing zero-sum game. That has been a prevailing mistake of our sex." This is a theme you have addressed many times in your work, Joyce, that sort of predators and prey and how that can be reversed. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and just a little bit about this story without giving anything away.
Well, Mr. Stickum is one of those strange stories. I'm not sure where the idea came from. It's like, if you're a writer and you write something, you get in this sort of state where you're kind of inspired. It could be late at night, maybe if there was a blizzard outside, and you write some story that has a lot of, it seems to have a lot of drama. And my story, which is so completely, I wouldn't say it was anti-male, but it's sort of like kind of a story that women might like better than men, I don't think there's one good man in the whole story, but there are a lot of girls. The girls are kind of banded together. And so I thought it was really surprising that Playboy published it. They're into my sadomasochism, maybe, that sort of thing. So I had to read the story somewhere, and people just sort of stared at me. And afterward, my poet friend, Henri Cole, said, "Joyce, I sat there, I couldn't believe what I was hearing." And he had this look on his face like he was appalled. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, Henri, it's just like they made me do it." They made me do it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I will admit the story has haunted me for months and months.
I also got the idea from a phenomenon in my house where there were a lot of, suddenly flies appeared. I don't know if you've had experiences like that. It's not a dirty house. I mean, it's quite clean, actually. Like one fly appears and you get rid of it. Then you see another fly and they get rid of that. Then there's like another fly. Where did they come from? So I asked for help, and somebody said, the best thing to do is have fly stickers,
Fly paper.
Fly paper, it's kind of an old-fashioned thing. Where I come from in the country, 1,000 years ago, they had fly paper all over, but I thought we'd gotten more advanced now. And I thought we were a different era. And they said, well, no, that's actually the best thing. So I actually had to have a fly paper in the kitchen, and the flies go right to it. So that's sort of the story. Except it's men. The girls build this kind of complicated but workable. I think it could be engineered. It's a big fly paper using industrial strength adhesive. Did you know there was glue that you can't get out of it? Say you're glued, you can't. You have to take off your skin. If it's in your hair, you have to shave your hair off. So I did the research into it. It could be possible. And so the story is sort of based on reality.
Yes, very, very creepy reality. But very much involved in, vengeance, sort of righteous statement. And I love these girl characters. They're riding on bicycles at one point, and they say they feel like Valkyries.
Valkyries.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think a long time ago, before the Me Too movement, and maybe even earlier, women and girls felt very isolated and alone, like if they were teased or tormented by boys or men or even one another. But I think that in more recent decades, girls and women band together, and there's more sense of a sisterhood. And the Me Too movement was very strong and really wonderful with that sense, like, you're not the only one, like me too. I was victimized also, and people coming out of anonymity. So my story is more for the 21st century, like this time now. But I do have a novel called Foxfire, which is a girl gang, and that would be like in the 1960s or so. So that was more like a girl gang in high school, and this is more like girls with a political awareness and alertness and consciousness of the suffering of other girls rather than just themselves. That was mainly the difference, I think.
Yes, a good evolution. So there's a lot in your work and in Zero Sum about the female body. And you edited, a new collection, A Darker Side of Noir, New Stories of Body Horror by Women Writers. And you talk in your introduction about body horror as most powerfully applying to women and girls. And we mentioned Valkyries. You also kind of look to antiquity for other figures. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about body horror and how it fits in your work.
Well, the concept of body horror in fiction is probably as old as fiction itself. But it's focusing on women and the conception of the body being a vessel for suffering and being afflicted and discriminated against. And it seems much more natural for women to feel vulnerable because the woman's body is vulnerable in the sense that one can be raped and impregnated, the things that can happen to the woman's body that you can't happen to the male body through the centuries. So I was looking at demonizing of females. One of the examples that I give is Medusa. She's always imaged with these ugly snakes sprouting out of her hair. It's like a really, really bad hair day. I mean, really bad, what do you do with that? But then when I looked into the legend, it was shocking. Medusa was a young girl. She was very beautiful, and she didn't have snakes in her hair. But she was raped by a god, one of these awful gods, and because of that, she had incurred the wrath, I think, of Athena, who's a female god. And so I think it was Athena who cursed her. So even the legend of Medusa, who seems to be a monstrous woman, if you look into it, she's actually a victimized girl who was accursed. And there's so many of the female demons in mythology, or maybe in history too, they were victims, and they stood up against the victimizer. In some cases, they didn't even do that, but they were still accursed.
Yes, it's an ongoing theme, and it's interesting. Many of the stories in this book are about women and their bodies and motherhood. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about, I'm thinking of the baby monitor for one example, which is an interesting pairing of, sort of the most ancient bond between mother and child and technology and what that does to us. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that story and that pairing, which you've done in other works of technology and human.
Well, my books of stories are usually arranged moving from a kind of psychological realism. The very first story, called Zero Sum, is set, as I said, in a university. And then as the collection goes on, the stories usually shift into a different mode, and they could be surreal. And finally, as the book continues, they could, in some cases, it'd be like parables, or they're more could be Gothic horror. And then I have a story at the very end that could be called science fiction or speculative fiction. So the baby monitor takes the idea that we're no longer living so much in a world of real people, but this young mother is made to get a baby monitor by mostly her mother-in-law wants her to have it, so that when she's not literally in the room with the baby, she has the monitor so she can look at the baby. And it's the story is imagined as an exploration of our society where we're increasingly looking at one another through screens. And when, of course, I wrote this story, everything was Zoom. I was teaching my students by way of Zoom, and probably everyone in the room has had enough of Zoom. You know, the only good thing about Zoom teaching was that we could hold our cats up to one another. And little doggies would run in the background, and it was kind of wonderful. I think my students were so traumatized by having to stay home in their bedrooms that they were very happy to show their gerbils or their hamsters. Somebody had a turtle. They had all these strange things, and yet you could not seem to be surprised at anybody's idea of a therapy animal. You have to be very sort of egalitarian about it, but I think cats are the best therapy animals. I just say that sort of parenthetically. So in the baby monitor, this young woman who didn't really want the baby monitor, she wants to just, do things the way her mother and her grandmother did, but no, we're in this world now where you have to be tuned in. You have a monitor. If you leave the room, you can watch somebody. If you leave the house, some people are watching their dogs, which seems a little strange. I'm not being critical, but if you watch your cat while you're gone, you just let the cat sleeping. I know people who are watching their animals while they're gone, and the animals are sleeping. It's just a strange thing. So as time goes on in the story, she really starts to become unhinged. She becomes mesmerized, and finally she can't look away from the baby monitor. Like the actual baby is not as interesting as the monitor, and she starts thinking that she's seeing different things in the monitor that you don't see in real life. But one thing that she realizes is that on the monitor you see the representation of a person. You don't see the person. You're seeing some sort of pixelated images and little things that are electronic. So you could be seeing the picture of anybody. Like, why would she have a particular feeling for that baby when it could be in like another baby's image? And it was a way for me to explore philosophical ideas. And it ends by the young mother going off the grid. She leaves. She takes the baby and she's off. She leaves the monitor and goes out.
Yes, thank you. Throughout this book, you really are looking at matters of the mind and the body, and keeping it together and losing it. There's also an element that increasingly, as this collection goes on, of awareness of the you call it failing of the world. So we're talking about climate crisis, environmental crisis.
Yes.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and the role in your stories.
Well, maybe I could read a little section because it would exemplify it.
Yes.
Well, as I was saying, the collection was put together during this fraught time of a good deal of unease and apprehension about the future. We in New Jersey, apart from the particular horror of being in New Jersey, we had the added terror of not knowing what was going on, but I think not anybody did, and everything was closed down. People were so suspicious of their groceries, some of my friends washing everything that came in the house, and then washing something else, and then putting it out in the outside for 2 weeks before they brought it in, and not bring in the mail. And I had some friends who I wouldn't say they went bonkers, because that's a little extreme. They went sort of crazy. And they did emerge from that, though. Please don't tell anybody that I'm talking about them. Well, one of the ideas that I was pursuing was how we think of ourselves in terms of genre, too. And this story is about this sounds like a real fun idea. The brain-eating bacteria and amoeba. Have you all read about them? So I don't know why this collection of stories doesn't have any humor in it. People are laughing. I don't quite know why they're laughing, but I guess you might as well laugh. So this story is called A Theory Pre-Post-Mortem. Like if there could be an autopsy, there would be an autopsy, but this is pre-mortem. So this idea is exploring the concept of genre and how that relates to our particular lives. The story in itself is not all that unusual. A husband and wife who are quite educated and fairly well-to-do, they are educators actually. They have all sorts of plans for the future. They have insurance. They're thinking about their retirement eventually, and they have own property, and everything is very thought out. Except one day they go swimming in this lake in upstate New York, and it has, because of global warming now, a certain kind of amoeba, there's a long name for it, which I'm not going to attempt and embarrass myself. That amoeba is not killed off in the frost any longer, but it survives over the winter, which is also true for ticks, I've been told, in New Jersey. I've been told lurid stories how the ticks don't die in the winter anymore, but they just they go into hibernation and they come out. Or this is similar. So they go swimming one day in the Catskills, and then as a consequence, they've infected themselves with this particular sort of amoeba, and then the story explores how to interpret this. If the genre is romance, then it's their genuine love for each other in the warm water shallows of late middle-age marriage that should be emphasized. If the genre is didactic nonfiction, it is the folly of the behavior in a rapidly changing climate that should be emphasized. Which is true for all of us, I think, that we're in this nonfiction situation where it has been known for decades that global change and climate change is real and that it's imminent and it's sort of rushing toward us. And yet, like the characters in the story, there's a certain obliviousness. It's as if with one part of our brains we are intellectual and rational and we read and we're responsible citizens. But in another part of our brain we're sort of thinking, well, it doesn't probably going to affect me. There's some disconnect. It must be in our species, some fatal disconnect. So if it's nonfiction, it's the folly of our behavior as a society. If the genre is tragedy with a satiric edge, or satire with a tragic edge, it's the ironic ignorance of intelligent, intellectual, highly educated individuals that should be emphasized. If the genre is allegory, it's their representative nature that should be emphasized. For the two are more than simply individuals for whom personal catastrophe is imminent. Indeed, it isn't their individual selves that concern us, since we scarcely get to know them before their story is abruptly and rudely ended.
Thank you, Joyce. So I know we're very close to time, so we're hoping that you will have questions for Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Hello.
I think there's microphones available.
Is she showing you the time?
Yeah,
Hello,
they were showing
everyone.
It's really horrific. They have like a Kindle. It says like you have like 10 seconds to go. And I was thinking, what if somebody was doing it all of our lives? You know, like you have like 4 years left. You know, 48 minutes left. You know, 10 minutes left for you. Like 2 years for you. Like it's really scary.
All right, everyone. So how the Q&A will work is if you have a question, please raise your hand nice and high, and myself or our house manager will bring a microphone to you. When you receive the mic, please feel free to stand and give your name if you would like to do so. Please speak into the microphone directly, and then please keep your questions to questions only, and please keep them brief. We're going to have our first one down in the front here.
Hi, I'm Michelle Kurlander, and I'm a lawyer who's always wanted to be a writer, and I used to write short stories about 40 years ago. I just have one rather simple but maybe not so simple question. In just a sentence or two, what would you describe as the absolute requirements for a good short story?
Oh gosh, that's impossible to answer. There are some short stories that are first-person monologues that are just somebody talking. I have an anthology that I teach with my writing students at Princeton. Just little stories this long. Then there are longer stories. I mean, the first published story written by Ernest Hemingway is called Indian Camp. It's like 3 pages long. Then there are stories by Chekhov that are much longer. And they're all different. Some are just realism, like somebody talking. Some are more artistic and more indirect, like some of James Joyce's work, with language being a priority. Then some stories, like by Tolstoy, are sort of moralistic and they're longer. So I would just pick up an anthology of short stories and just read them. That's the best way.
No such thing as a sine qua non.
Pardon me?
There's no such thing as a must-have.
No such thing as a must-have? Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's something about the microphone, I can't really hear it.
Well, there's no such thing as an absolute requirement that must...
Oh, no, that's not an absolute requirement, no.
Okay, thank you.
Stand, please.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. You're so incredibly prolific.
Where is this person?
I'm wondering how you write. Do you write all the time? Does something come to you? Do you make notes all the time? I mean, it's amazing, 58 novels, and you're constantly writing critiques and all this kind of stuff. So I'm wondering about your writing. And I also wanted to ask you, as a member of the Princeton faculty, but in general, we heard Yasha Monk talk about identity synthesis and this new kind of tyrannical approach that we have to what we are allowed to say and how we are allowed to say it. And I wonder if that affects you at all, because you're pretty lively on Twitter.
Well, I think the questions sort of double, and both parts of it are sort of unanswerable. Well, I don't know really how to answer it. I think we all have a certain amount of time and energy in our lives, and I have many friends who do different kinds of work. I mean, my mother was not a writer in any way, but she was very creative, the different ways that people express creativity. I mean, to take my mother as an example, I think she's sort of quintessential housewife mother, a person who created a family, created a household, made meals, had a kind of loving atmosphere. She sewed clothing, she did things like that. So that's creativity in a domestic way. Then there are people who are artists and musicians, and their creativity goes more out to the community. And then there are people who are writers, and their creativity goes into print and sort of goes out into the community also. So they're all equal kinds of creativity. So I focused on the writing because I just love language. I love storytelling. When I was a little girl, I was telling stories with Crayola and just doing little things like that. To me, creativity is playful. And I think that we can have serious, even tragic content, but the creativity itself should be playful and experimental.
Excellent. Our next question is going to be in the back, right over here on your right.
Hi, my name is Fran, And I guess my question is pretty simple, but can you pinpoint a certain age or a certain story when you like really started to get into short story writing or just writing in general?
Well, let's see, when I was very little, I was writing these tablet, as I was saying. I couldn't write yet, I could only draw. I mean, I drew cats and chickens because that's all I knew. Like, I wasn't up to drawing people, so I never got to that stage, actually. But so I would like to know what my little stories were about. I had these tablets all filled with chickens and cats doing things. Then instead of writing, I had scribbles because I thought that's what handwriting was. I thought adult handwriting was like scribbles, so I was just scribbling away. And I just it kind of went on from there, you know. At some point I must have learned to write, and so I was not scribbling, I was doing writing at that point. Then somebody gave me a typewriter, my grandmother, and then from that point onward, I remember when I was quite young, reading stories by Hemingway. I was like a sophomore in high school, and Hemingway was my first great influence. Now, Hemingway himself would be embarrassed to know that he was my influence, but nonetheless, that was true. When you read my writing today, you can't see probably any influence at all of Hemingway because a lot of other things have intervened. So I think that being a writer is like reading and looking at the world and incorporating a lot of different things. And your own voice is very exciting when you discover it. Like writing with a first person I, just like writing your story, it will be different from other people's.
True, that answers my question.
Next question in the to your right in the rear.
Hello, I'm Marin. I'm a student at U Chicago, and I guess I'm just curious about, you mentioned the pandemic, and just kind of a follow-up question to that about your influences during writing this collection, whether that's music, criticism, activities. I think like what was inspiring you specifically, or things that you would put in conversation with this collection?
Well, as I said, most of the stories were written during the pandemic. I also wrote a novel during the pandemic. I was very intensely alone. My husband had died a few years ago, so I was in this house with all the reminders of another life that was much happier, my happier life. It was sort of like I was in a posthumous life, so like a life that wasn't really real. So I was just looking around at stories and how I could tell them in different ways. So some stories are much more realistic than others. Others move toward the parable. The most fun story in the volume I didn't have a chance to read from is about the very, very last specimen of Homo sapiens, which is a woman. She's 127 years old, and she's had all these facelifts and innards and all these organ transplants and everything, and a different skin and so forth. But the AIs have taken over the world because there's nobody else left. All the human beings have died. And to me, that story was set in a world not so far distant where we had to be indoors because the landscape and the air was all toxic, was all completely toxic, and civilization has to be in domes where the air is controlled. And individuals were not allowed to go out. And even the AI machines couldn't go out anymore because they would start to rust. They're made of some sort of metal. The only thing that's out there is certain kinds of cockroaches. And the amoebas of the other story, those kind of just keep on trucking along, you know. And so that story, though somebody would say, well, it's science fiction because it takes place in 2130 or something. But to me, it didn't seem like science fiction. It was like something that could really, really happen. And we have organ transplants today, like even a heart transplant, totally unknown. Like 100 years ago, people would just think you were just completely fantasizing. Liver transplant, kidney, all this. Next it would be brain transplant, like total skin transplant. Can the brain be transplanted? All these things I think scientists are probably working on. So the writing, though it has these different genres, it has a basic theme that I think is very realistic. And the ending of the story about the Homo sapiens, the ending says this is the referendum, that people are coming to vote about something, and your vote is important. So my whole collection is based on the premise that it actually isn't too late, that our votes, individual votes that become collective, we could still do something about this disaster that's sort of awaiting us. Yeah.
All right, our next question is on our right side here.
Hi, Ms. Oates. It's an honor. I'm a huge fan. My question's about the adaptations of your work. I'm thinking specifically of the film Foxfire, which was maybe not so faithful, or something like even Blonde, which came out last year, I believe, and I thought captured some of what you were going for on the page. What are your favorite adaptations of your work?
You know, there's something about the microphone. Could you hear him?
I think I believe he was asking about adaptation of your work, like Blonde.
Oh, that's
that
what you were
the question?
asking. Huh. I'm trying to lip read in the dark. I don't know if it's my ears or something has happened, but I actually couldn't hear most of what you were saying either.
It is odd up here.
Kind of going through life, nodding and saying, well, Joyce says these kooky things all the time, but because she's a writer. Actually, I can't believe you were asking about Blonde. Well, what can I say about Blonde? When I saw, do I have to say anything about Blonde? Well, it was 20 years to make that movie because they couldn't get money for it. And during that time, in the beginning, Naomi Watts was going to be playing Marilyn Monroe. Then she, quote, aged out, which is the worst term in the English language, is aged out, like, oh, she aged out. Then they chose another very blonde, beautiful young woman who also aged out. So they finally found Ana de Armas, this incredible Cuban actress who happens to be brunette. And she's not American, she's Cuban. So she turned out to be a fantastic Marilyn Monroe. She plays in the movie, she plays really two people. One is Norma Jean Baker, who's a girl who's pretty frightened and timorous about life. And then she plays Marilyn Monroe, who's like the professional role that Norma Jean learned how to play. But Marilyn Monroe was always a performance with platinum hair and lots of makeup, and she had some cosmetic surgery. So Marilyn Monroe was like an attitude and a very breathy voice. It took hours for the makeup for Marilyn Monroe. She looks very natural, and she's extremely beautiful when you see her in Some Like It Hot. But the real woman at that time was psychologically so broken that I did a good deal of research into the life of Norma Jean Baker, who performed as Marilyn Monroe, and it's just remarkable how she could be literally suicidal, she could be addicted to drugs, so unhappy, desperately unhappy. She would show up at the studio, she was always late, then they put the makeup on and get her ready. She goes out, there's something about her photogenic face. She could, and she had a way of relating to the camera. I think she couldn't relate to people as well as to the camera. Most of us are the opposite. We can't relate to the camera. So Ana de Armas plays the two sides of Marilyn Monroe so brilliantly that the movie in itself, just for her performance, is really stunning. Did you see it?
I did see
Wasn't
it.
she
Yes,
amazing?
Yes, she was amazing.
I mean, really amazing. So I saw the first form of it, but I couldn't see it in a continuous way. I had to stop it. I had it on my computer. I found it so intense. And I said to the director that it really is a horror film. He uses horror film atmosphere and development of scenes and music. So there are scenes at the end that are horrifying, that I found terrifying, where a person's losing her mind. Edgar Allan Poe thought the most horrific thing in life would be going insane. And I think that's probably true, where you lose your ego identity and you just become prey to all these unconscious phantasms. And that's what happens in the movie. So I thought the movie was a very experimental expression of the director. The novel that it was adapted from is much longer and has many more aspects of Marilyn Monroe and Norma Jean, but movies have to be, they shouldn't be much more than 2 hours long, so there's a compression and a selection. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one more quick question. As a reminder, there will be a book signing of Zero Sub-Stories immediately following the program. Here's our last question.
Hello, I was curious if you continue to follow boxing at all, and if you had a favorite boxer or boxing match that you felt captured the essence of the sport.
Well, this was a question about boxing. I heard that word. Do I have what was the rest of it?
If you had a favorite fighter or boxing match that you thought captured the essence of the sport.
Oh, you're asking me about boxing, like my favorite boxers? Well, it's Chicago, Muhammad Ali. I mean, he lived here at some point. Muhammad Ali, unsurpassed. I mean, just brilliant. I like Jack Johnson very much, first black heavyweight champion. Terrific boxer. If you don't know Jack Johnson, you should look up Jack Johnson. He had a great influence on Muhammad Ali. And of course, Mike Tyson, who's my buddy. I haven't seen Mike in a while. That's okay. No, Mike Tyson was the only boxer whom I actually knew. And he was brilliant in his own way, but his own way was, well, we don't want to go into it. It could have been a little different. I think things happened in Mike Tyson's personal life that were unfortunate. Sugar Ray Robinson and Sugar Ray Leonard I like a lot, but I don't want to go on because many people are offended by boxing. When I was writing about boxing some time ago, women would come up to me and say, "How could you write about that disgusting sport?" You know, and I said, well, you know, I sort of tiptoed away because you sort of can't engage with people who take the attitude. My attitude was boxing is indefensible, like war. You know, it happens, like people are going to write about it and have opinions, and it's indefensible. It's terrible, but so is war, and so are the things that people do to one another, but writers have to bear witness to what's happening.
That's a great note to end on, Joyce. Thank you so much. Thanks for your great question.